The wood your contractor just framed your addition with is not the same wood that built your grandparents' house. And if you're about to start any kind of renovation, addition, deck, or structural project, you need to understand why. Because it will change how you talk to your contractor, how you buy materials, and what you can realistically expect from the finished product 10 years down the road. Hit subscribe before we begin, because we cover this kind of stuff every week, and you'll want to be here for it. I'm Jerry Davis. I've been in construction and renovation for over 20 years. I've framed houses, built decks, finished basements, and pulled apart walls that other people built. And one of the things I talk about more and more lately is lumber, specifically why it keeps getting worse and what you can actually do about it. And I'm not just venting here. This is real information that affects your home, your budget, and your renovation results. So let me start with something you may have already noticed if you've ever bought lumber at a home center or watched a framing crew work. The boards warp, they cup, they twist. Sometimes you take a 2x4 off the shelf and it looks like it's already trying to escape the rack. You hold it up to your eye and the thing has a bow in it you could see from across the parking lot. That's not bad luck. That is the result of a system that now prioritizes volume and speed over quality. And once you understand how we got here, a lot of things start to make sense. Let me go back a little. The lumber that built most of the houses in America through the mid-20th century came from old-growth forests, trees that had been growing for 80, 100, sometimes 150 years. That kind of wood is dense. The growth rings are tight. When you look at a cross-section of a board from that era, the rings are packed in so close together, you can barely count them. Dense wood is stable. It doesn't move around a lot with humidity changes. It holds fasteners well. It's strong without needing to be oversized. A 2x4 from 1955 is a fundamentally different piece of material than a 2x4 from a box store today, even if they look exactly the same on the shelf. Here's what no one tells you. The old-growth supply essentially ran out. By the 1980s and into the 1990s, the timber industry had largely shifted to plantation forestry, meaning fast-growth trees planted in rows, managed for maximum yield, and harvested in cycles of 20 to 40 years instead of 80 to 100. Now, I understand why that happened. The old growth wasn't sustainable at the rate it was being cut. Plantation forestry is better for the environment in a lot of ways. But the trade-off is that the wood is fundamentally different. Fast growth trees have wide growth rings, lots of sapwood, and a much lower density. When you mill that wood into lumber, it's softer, it's lighter, and it moves a lot more in response to moisture changes. And that brings me to the moisture problem, because this is where I see the most real-world damage in homes. Lumber is supposed to be kiln-dried before it gets to the job site. The moisture content needs to be down around 19% or lower for dimensional lumber used in framing. Below that level, the wood is stable enough that when it gets to a conditioned space, it doesn't move too dramatically. But here's the problem. Demand for lumber is constant, and the pressure to move product is real. A lot of the lumber sitting in those big retail stacks hasn't been dried long enough, or it was dried and then sat outside under inadequate cover getting wet again. You've seen this. Blue or black staining on the ends, mud and moisture on the surfaces. That lumber goes into walls and floors, and when the house heats up and the humidity drops, that wood starts giving up its moisture and it moves. Studs bow into rooms, floors squeak, drywall cracks, nail pops show up across entire ceilings 6 months after a fresh paint job. And most homeowners have no idea why. I get it. You hired a framing crew, they used lumber from a legitimate supplier. So how is this your problem? But here's the thing. You need to be asking questions about this before the frame goes up, not after. Now, let me talk about something called finger-jointed lumber, because this is one that causes a lot of confusion. You'll see it in 2x4S and 2x6S used for wall studs. It's the stuff where you can see little zigzag joints running across the width of the board, usually at multiple points along the length. Those are sections of shorter boards that have been cut with interlocking points and glued together to make a full-length stud. And look, the manufacturers will tell you it's structurally equivalent, and in terms of code compliance, it often is. But here's what no one tells you. The glue joints are only as strong as the application and curing process. And the individual sections can have different moisture contents that make the board behave unpredictably after installation. I've opened walls that were framed with finger-jointed studs and found splits right at those glue lines, especially in exterior walls where the seasonal moisture swings are more dramatic. It's not universal, but it's common enough that I avoid specifying it for anything structural where I have a choice. And you do have a choice. That's the point. You can walk into most lumber yards, not box stores, but actual lumber yards, and you can ask for select structural grade solid stock. It costs more, maybe meaningfully more, depending on your market. But if you're building an addition or framing a load-bearing wall, this is not the place to save $40. This is where people mess up. They let the contractor make every material decision without understanding what's actually going into the project. A contractor who's cutting costs or working on a tight bid is going to use whatever meets minimum code. And minimum code isn't minimum quality. Those are not the same thing. Code tells you what won't fall down. Quality tells you what's going to last and stay straight and perform well for 20 years without you wondering why your drywall keeps cracking. Let me talk about grades for a second, because this is a system that sounds more reliable than it actually is. Lumber is graded as it comes off the saw. Number 1, number 2, number 3, select structural, and so on. In most residential framing, you're going to see a lot of number 2 grade, which is the standard middle ground. The problem is that grading is done visually, and it's done fast in a production environment. The allowable knot sizes, warp tolerances, and grain deviations within each grade class are wider than most people realize. So, 2 boards that are both stamped number 2 can look and perform very differently. And because the underlying wood quality from fast-growth plantation trees is lower to begin with, the variation within a grade is more pronounced than it used to be. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying modern lumber is garbage across the board. Engineered lumber products, things like LVL beams, LSL studs, I-joists for floor systems, these have actually gotten better and more consistent over time. They're made by breaking down fast-growth wood into fibers, strands, or veneers and reassembling it with adhesive under controlled conditions. The result is a product that is dimensionally stable and predictable in a way that solid sawn lumber simply cannot be anymore. If you're building a floor system on a new addition, a good contractor should be speccing engineered I-joists over solid sawn lumber. If they're not, ask why. Here's a pro tip. When you're talking to your contractor about a framing project, ask 2 specific questions. 1, where is the lumber coming from, and what moisture content can they guarantee at delivery? 2, are they open to substituting engineered studs or LSL for the exterior wall framing on any load-bearing section? A contractor who gets defensive about those questions is a contractor who hasn't thought much about material quality beyond the bid price. A good contractor will welcome the conversation and probably have opinions of their own. Now, let me talk about decks, because this is where I see the most homeowner frustration with lumber quality. People spend real money on a deck, materials, labor, permits, sometimes a designer, and then 3 or 4 years in, the boards are cupping and splitting, and the whole thing looks 10 years older than it is. A lot of that comes down to pressure-treated lumber, and specifically how it's handled after purchase and before installation. Here's what happens. Pressure-treated lumber today uses a copper-based preservative system called ACQ or CA. These are safer than the old arsenic-based treatments, and that's genuinely a good thing. But the treatment process itself adds significant moisture to the wood. When that lumber comes off the truck and gets installed in direct sun immediately, it dries out fast and unevenly, and it cups and splits in ways that look like a defective product. The board isn't necessarily defective. It's wet lumber that needed time to acclimate and dry down before anyone touched it with a fastener. The fix is simple, and almost no one does it. Stack the lumber flat on stickers, which are just small strips of wood that allow air to circulate underneath. Cover the pile from rain, but leave the sides open, and let it dry for 2 to 3 weeks before installation. That acclimation period dramatically reduces the movement after the deck is built. Some contractors will push back on this because it adds time to the job. Stand your ground. A few extra weeks now prevents a deck that looks wrecked by the time you've had 3 summers on it. And for premium deck material, I want to say something that might be controversial. If your budget allows it, and you're building a deck you intend to keep for 20 years, composite decking has genuinely gotten good enough that I now recommend it to most clients over pressure-treated wood. The early composite products from the late 90s were terrible. They faded, they molded, they got slippery in the rain. The current generation, from the better manufacturers, is a completely different product. Dimensionally stable, color fast, low maintenance. It costs more upfront, and you need to install it correctly, meaning proper gapping, proper hidden fasteners, and a solid framing structure beneath it. But you're not painting it, staining it, sealing it, or replacing cupped boards every few years. Over a 20-year lifespan, the math gets a lot more interesting. Now let's talk about what you can actually do when you're buying solid sawn lumber for a project, because I don't want to leave you feeling like there's nothing you can control. First, buy from a real lumberyard when you can, not because box stores are dishonest, but because a dedicated lumberyard turns inventory faster, stores it better, and has staff who actually know what they're selling. Ask about moisture content. Ask if they have stickered and covered storage. Some yards will sell you kiln-dried, certified lumber with an actual moisture reading on the tag, and that small piece of information is worth a lot. Second, look at the end grain when you're selecting boards. Tight, dense growth rings mean older, slower-grown wood. That still exists in some species and at some price points, especially in Douglas fir out of the Pacific Northwest, or southern yellow pine from the right mill. You're probably not going to find it in the standard SPF rack, but some yards carry it if you ask specifically. Third, pick your own boards when the project allows it. If you're buying 20 studs, go to the rack and pull them yourself. Sight down each one, set it flat on the concrete, and see if it rocks. Check both ends for splits. Reject anything with heavy cupping, obvious warp, or black moisture staining. Yes, it takes longer. Yes, the guy at the register is going to give you a look. Yes, it is absolutely worth it. And fourth, plan for movement. Even good lumber moves with humidity. In any finished carpentry situation, give the wood time to acclimate to the space before you install it. Crown molding, door casing, window trim, hardwood flooring. Bring it in, stack it properly, let it sit for a week or two. The gaps and cracks that show up after installation are almost always preventable with just a little patience. I've watched contractors rush flooring installs and then spend twice as long patching the gaps 6 months later. Don't let that be your project. One more thing I want to address, because I get questions about this constantly. People ask whether it's worth paying for premium species like Douglas fir or southern yellow pine versus the standard SPF, which stands for spruce pine fir. That makes up most of what you see in stores. For standard interior wall framing, the difference is real, but not critical, if you're selecting carefully and your moisture situation is controlled. But for anything that's going to carry load, resist racking, or live in a semi-exposed environment like a garage or a covered porch, the higher density of SYP or Doug fir makes a genuine difference. Nail holding strength, stiffness, resistance to crushing under a post. These things matter in structural applications and the species you use affects all of them. Can we also please stop ignoring the real cost of bad lumber decisions? A framing mistake that hides inside a wall is one of the most expensive problems to fix later. Bowed studs mean drywall that won't lay flat. High moisture content means nail pops and cracks within a year of painting. Finger-jointed studs splitting at load points mean you're looking at structural corrections that involve opening walls. None of this is catastrophic by itself, but all of it adds up to a home that feels like it's aging faster than it should, and a homeowner who can't figure out why. This, one, drives me nuts because the information exists, the grades exist, the better products exist, but the system is set up to move the cheapest compliant material as fast as possible. And unless you know what to ask for, you get whatever was easiest to load on the truck. Tell me in the comments what lumber problem you've run into on a project, because I hear about this constantly, and I know I'm not the only one frustrated by it. Whether it's a deck that cupped after one season, studs that bowed into your drywall, or a floor that squeaks because the I-joist spacing was off, I want to know what you're dealing with. And if you found a great local lumber yard that actually takes quality seriously, share it. That information is genuinely useful to other people watching. The bottom line is this: the lumber available today is not automatically worse than what existed 50 years ago, but it requires more attention, more careful selection, and more planning to use well. The underlying wood is different, the grading system has real limitations, and the pressure to move product fast doesn't help anyone except the supplier. Know your grades, ask about moisture content, give pressure-treated material time to dry, spec engineered products where they make sense, and don't let material decisions be invisible to you just because your contractor is handling them. That's your house. You're allowed to ask questions about what's going into it.